is one of the great Bible stories of all time. It is the story of the road to Emmaus. Now, on that same day, two of the disciples were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all the things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. And one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these past days?" Jesus asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they didn't see Jesus." Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them the things about himself and all the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it's almost evening, and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening up the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. They were saying, "The Lord has risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road, and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. Let us pray. Lord, your word only be spoken and your words only heard, and we do ask this all for your love's precious sake. Amen. Please be seated. Well, life does have a way of taking twists and turns, often unexpected twists and turns that bring us to places where we never expected we'd be and aren't always sure how we got there. That certainly seems to be the case in today's gospel when we have these two people, one named Cleopas, who we know virtually nothing about, an unnamed companion, perhaps they were a married couple, walking from Jerusalem down a 7-mile road up to a little town called Emmaus. And as they're on this walk talking together, a stranger joins them, a stranger who we know to be Jesus, but of course they don't know that because their eyes are prevented from recognizing him. It raises the question of what prevented them from recognizing Jesus, and perhaps the text itself gives us a clue. Perhaps there's a clue found in the description of them as sad, in the description of Cleopas and his companion as those who had hoped that life would turn out differently. And so perhaps it is in these dashed hopes, if you will, perhaps it is in this sorrow, perhaps it is this grief that has them turned so inward that they don't recognize who it is that's walking with them and what it is that he offers to them. And it seems to me that all of our lives, all of our stories, if you will, could be told, at least in some ways, as the story of, and we had hoped. In some ways, my story, for instance. I mean, make no mistake about it, my life is good. My life is better than I had ever hoped for, far better than I ever deserved. Frankly, I never expected to live this long. I mean, my generation live hard, die young, so I really sort of never expected to even be here today. So this is all gravy. But at the same time, as good as my life has been in so many ways, my story is also a story, as much as any other story, it's a story, and he had hoped. I had hoped that certain things would happen. I had hoped that certain things would turn out certain ways. And some of those things just never happened. Some of those things never turned out how I wanted them to. And he had hoped The world wasn't what he had hoped the world would be. And I expect that's true of your life as well. And he had hoped. I had hoped to have more time with my dad. I had hoped to spare my children some of the heartache and sorrow, which from my perspective just seems so unnecessary, but perhaps is an essential part of anyone growing up and learning to deal with life. But I had hoped to spare them that, and as necessary as it might be, it doesn't make it hurt any less. I had hoped, and one of the things that I always did hope is I had hoped to have a son, and I never did have a son. And what happens sometimes is when we don't speak these hopes, and we don't realize these hopes, and we don't get in touch with these hopes, is they begin to define us, and they begin to curtail us, and they begin to close us down to the larger possibilities of our life. And very often we communicate our disappointments without our even knowing it. So people pick up on these things, and they make assumptions about these things. And so I remember it was the year 2000. It was the year my parents had just moved into their home on the top of a mountain in North Carolina, Victory Lane, looking at Mount Pisgah across the way. And we came down that summer to vacation there, and we camped out at Episcopal National Park, right on the Davidson River. And that year it just poured. It was just torrential downpours, and our tent flooded, and it was great. We had a great time as a family together. And in between one of those downpours, we were able to build a little fire, and we stretched a hammock out, a couple hammocks out in between the trees. And I was in that hammock just enjoying the firelight. And my older daughter, Christine, who at that time would have been 12 years old, she came up and climbed into the hammock with me. And just like she was a little baby, she sort of tucked herself in, so her head was sort of right under here, and just curled up, and just curled up. And I wrapped my arms around her, and all of a sudden I could feel her body just start to tremble and then shake, and then I realized she was crying. And I said, "Oh, what's the matter? What's going on?" And she, in this tremulous little voice, can barely get the words out. She says, "Dad, did you always want me to be a boy?" And you talk about disappointment. You talk about the things we communicate. And so one of the things that we need to do is we need to be able to face our "and he had hoped," and "she had hoped," and to put words to them and talk through them and work through them so that we don't communicate these things in ways that are destructive. Yes, I was disappointed that I didn't have a boy, but that didn't mean I didn't love my daughters. That didn't mean I wasn't thankful every day for my daughters. That doesn't mean I would have wanted it to be any other way. I love my daughters more than life itself, and of course that's what I told Christine, and the simple truth is I can imagine going on in almost any situation, but if something were to happen to my daughters, I'm just not sure I really could go on if that were the case. So, but it's important then that we communicate, that we get in touch with our "and he had hoped" and "she had hopes," and so that we can process them and move beyond them, and so that we don't communicate them in ways that are hurtful to the people around us, in ways that are often destructive. And so that's why Jesus, when he comes up to Cleopas and his companion, and he says, "What are you guys talking about?" And they look at Jesus like he has a third eye in his head. "You don't know what's happening? I mean, haven't you been on your cell phone lately? Aren't you following social media?" I mean, they just think Jesus is crazy. And Jesus says, "No, he says, 'Tell me, what were you talking about?'" And he looks at him, and he just sees them standing there, and we're just told they were sad. They were disappointed. The world had not turned out to be like they wanted the world to be, and so they just were filled with grief and sorrow. And Jesus, seeing that grief and sorrow, he says, "Tell me about it. Talk to me about it." And they engage in this conversation over this 7-mile road. And I think that might not be a bad definition of the church, frankly. Perhaps a really good definition of the church is that place where we can come and talk about our "and he had hoped" and "she had hoped," the things that didn't turn out the way we wanted them to turn out, the things that are so painful for us, the things that are so hard for us. The church is that place, perhaps, that one safe place where we can come and talk about these things and journey together in these things and recognize that God is present with these things and gain a larger perspective on these things and move through these things. The church is that place where hopefully the church at its best, when the church is working right, is that place where we can come and talk about our "and he had hoped" and "she had hoped," and invite God to be present in those things. And so Jesus walks with them in the midst of their disappointment, in the midst of their, and he had hopes. And they have this long conversation. And at the end of this conversation, it's coming to be evening. It looks like Jesus is going to go on. And instead of going on, they constrain Jesus. It's very strong language. They compel Jesus to stay with them. They say, no, you have to stay with us. And so they more or less, force him. They don't allow him to go on. You got to come in. You got to have a meal with us. And then in language it is reminiscent of the worship service. He takes bread, blesses bread, breaks bread, and distributes it. So we're meant to think of what happens at the table. The language is exactly the same. The one's meant to evoke the other. They have this moment of revelation. And this moment of revelation, God gives them grace. There's this moment of revelation. Their eyes are open. They see Jesus for who Jesus is. They see the work that Jesus is doing. And they're able to gain perspective on their disappointment. And yes, their disappointment was valid. Jesus did not do what they hoped Jesus would do. They hoped Jesus would rid the world of Rome. They hoped Jesus would free Israel from serving an occupied force. But Jesus did not do that. So their disappointment was real. Their disappointment was valid. But in recognizing that the world was not as they wanted to be, they were able to see the way that God was at work in the world still. God did not deliver Israel from Rome, but he delivered Israel from themselves. He delivered the disciples from themselves. And so what he did do is he didn't eradicate Rome from the world, but he helped Israel see that they needed to wake up to the new thing that God was doing and delivered them from being caught up in their glorious past. And their past was glorious. And so they wanted the good old days, the King David days, but there was a new thing God was doing, and they needed to be able to live into that new thing. He delivered them from being strangled by their love of the law. And the law was a beautiful thing, and unlike anything the world had ever known, but they'd gotten so tangled up in the permutations that it was strangling the very life from the people of Israel. He delivered them from losing their love for God himself, their zeal for God, and their zeal for religion, the forms, the rituals, the temple. He delivered them from thinking it was beneath their dignity to serve. They were God's chosen people. They were the holy ones. They didn't serve other people. People were going to come to their feet. And yet Jesus helps us understand that nothing could be further from the truth. When you're given great privilege, that great privilege is given so that you can better serve people that are around you. And that's a message we'd all do well to heed. And of course, he teaches them to be delivered from thinking that they gain their life by saving their life. No, we gain our life by giving our life away. And so it's this moment of revelation where they see clearly in the midst of their disappointment and are able to see the larger thing that God is doing and participate in this larger thing that God is doing. And that is why church itself is so important, is that this becomes that place where we have this moment of revelation where every week we're invited to have our eyes open. And it's a place like any other place. We don't do the things we do here any other place. And so it's a place that looks different. It feels different. Where else do you sit in such uncomfortable seats? We do very different things. And all these things are meant to prime the eyes of our heart so that we'll be able to receive the grace of revelation, to get the larger perspective of what God is doing despite our disappointments, despite our failed hopes, and to participate in those larger things. What I discovered is that you could do, I always wanted to have a son because I wanted to do boy things with my son because I sort of love boy things. But what I discovered is you can do boy things with girls. And it wasn't always fair to my girls. It made them a little strange sometimes. But you know what? We had a good time together. And then, in fact, what I learned on an even deeper level is that boy things and girl things are sort of artificial constructs in themselves. And that it's all really a very individual thing. And so I just came to absolutely love doing the things with my daughters that I would have done with the son. Going fishing, watching monster movies, raising snakes. The various things that we did. My younger daughter was home for Easter, and one thing she wanted to do while she was home, she didn't want to go to the mall. She didn't want to buy a new piece of technology. She didn't want new clothes. She wanted to go find a snake. So we went out, we walked behind our house, I went down Horseman Trail, and we found 2 snakes. And she was so happy, that was all she could talk. So, you know what? You can do boy things with girls, and it turns out that boy things and girlfriends are sort of and girl things are sort of all in our head anyhow. And when we can get beyond the way that we thought things should be, the way we expected things to be, we learn that there's a whole bigger, larger world that is full of good things in and of itself. And we learn that even though the world isn't always as we wish the world would be, I wish my dad was still in the world. This is not the way I wish the world would be. But yet God works in this world still. And what God is doing in this world is still good, and I can still participate in those things. And again, that's why this hour is so important, because this is that moment, unlike any other moment, where we're invited to have these revelations that give us perspective, that help us realize the value of the people we're journeying with. And yes, you can have a revelation on the golf course. Yes, you can have a revelation on the trout stream. But I don't, because I'm too busy playing golf, and I'm too busy trying to catch a trout. Yes, you can have a revelation in the workplace, but I don't, because I'm too busy working. I mean, it can happen, but most of the time our focus is elsewhere, right? Here is the place that primes our heart for that. And one last thing that I'll share with you, and this is something that is not easy to speak, and I'm sure it takes some courage to hear, but I invite you to think about this with me for a moment. And I think you've got this down by the fact that you're here this morning. So I really share this by way of encouraging you. But it's a matter of thinking what's important. I know how important is this moment of revelation that gives perspective to our week, that helps us prioritize and order our lives so that we just don't get caught up in the same rat race that everybody else is caught up in, the same values that everybody else is caught up in, the same way of life that everybody else is caught up in. And so it's always dangerous when somebody starts off when I was growing up. I mean, you know not to trust that entirely, so I'm saying that right up front. But when I was growing up, the things that we thought were essential for children were basically contained Monday to Friday between 9 and 5. I mean, that was pretty much the way it was. And you could go to school, you could do intramurals, you could play Little League, but you still came home and had dinner for your family, with your family. And then Saturdays were down days. That was just the expectation. There was nothing that happened on Saturdays. Saturdays were just down days, because what people thought back then was that it was important for kids to have down days. Is that more important than programming every minute of their life was for kids just to have down days. And then Sundays were family days. And sometimes that was like pulling teeth, because the last people you want to be with was your family. You really wanted to be with your friends, right? But you had to be with your family. And in fact, that ended up being a good thing, because you knew your family was always there for you no matter what. And one of the things that families always did together was they worshiped together. They went to a place, and that brought perspective to life. It kept people from getting too far. And so fathers, when their work day was done, they would walk down the street 7 o'clock at night and then play Little League with all the kids. They wouldn't go back into the office because the structure of that world was such that it reminded people of the importance of those sorts of things. Now we live in this day and age where we think so much is important, you couldn't possibly fit it all in Monday to Friday, so it spills over into Saturday, and now in recent years it's spilled over into Sunday. And that really is the last 10 years sort of development. And so it forces people to choose, is this important or something else important? And that's a hard decision to make, and obviously a lot of people say something else is important. This isn't that important. And the problem with that is that every measure of well-being for our kids is actually going downhill. And so as we push our kids harder and harder, as we, adults, say more and more is important, our kids have to have this, they got to do this, and we jam it all into their lives, what we end up doing is pushing our kids past the breaking point. And that's why we have so many kids that are struggling in so many ways, with so many things, with so much anxiety, with so much depression, with so much medication, and just sort of on and on. And so I just want to make a plea, and not even as a priest. I mean, just forget I'm a priest as a second. Just as a fellow human being. I want to applaud you on being so wise and conscious that you were here this morning and that you're making this important. This moment where you gain perspective for yourself, for your families, for your kids, for your community. And I know there's so much pressure to say other things are more important than this. So it takes courage. And I want to commend you on that courage. I want to say I know it's not easy. And I
I just want to plead with you to stay the course for your sake, for your kids' sake, for our community's sake. I think this hour is in many ways the most important hour of all. This hour where we are given the grace of revelation that gives us perspective, that helps us order our life rightly, that helps us value the people that are around us, the people that we travel with, and let them know how important they are to us. My dear and beloved friends, my prayer is that in the middle of this road we call life, the Emmaus story wouldn't just be a story a long, long time ago, but that it would be your story, that it would be my story, that in the midst of your and he hoped, and she hoped, when things just didn't turn out like we planned, and some of those things are just plain heartbreaking, that we find companions for the journey. And we realize how important those companions are, how much we love them, and how important it is that we show that love to them. That we realize that one of those companions is God, God's self. And that in realizing this, we receive the grace, even in the midst of our disappointments, to participate in what God is doing for our sake, for the sake of our family, for the sake of the world. Amen. Amen.